Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Upside of College Enrollment for Black Florida Students and the Value of HBCUs webinar hosted by Helios Education Foundation. Before we get started, we have just a few housekeeping items. To minimize background noise, we'll ask that all webinar participants keep their microphones muted for the duration of the webinar. Audience questions are really encouraged here. And if you have a question, please type it in the chat box located on the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. We'll be answering audience questions at the end of this webinar. A short survey will appear also on your screen at the end of the webinar, and we ask that you take a few moments to answer it and share any feedback. Finally, just to let everyone know, this webinar is being recorded and it will be emailed to you later this week. With that, let me now turn it over and introduce Paul Luna, Helios's president and CEO.
Thank you, Dr. Peralt. Good morning to everyone. My name is Paul Luna. I'm the president and CEO of Helios Education Foundation, and we're excited to host this webinar to a national audience this morning. This is really part of our work to engage people on a recently released Helios research report called The Upside of College Enrollment for Black Florida Students and the Value of HBCUs. While the data in the report is focused on Florida, we believe that the research has implications for other states and quite frankly, across the country. That interest is indicated by the representation of the number of you participating in today's webinar, in addition to the number of folks who are Helios partners and colleagues from Florida. We're also joined today by participants from Arizona, Massachusetts, Michigan, Washington, D.C., and many other locations across the country. I want to especially acknowledge that some of Helios Education Foundation board members have joined us today as well. Ioana Morfesis, Donna Ripley, Jim Swanson, Veda Manager, Mark Fernandez, and Larry Rice have all joined us today. And I just want to acknowledge them and thank them once again for their leadership and support of our work at Helios. Our founding chairman, Vince Roig, and vice chair, Jane Roig, unfortunately are in a cruise somewhere, so they could not participate, but we just wanted to acknowledge the leadership of our board who's engaging and supporting us in this work today. I also want to acknowledge and thank all of you for joining us, for taking the time to be with us for this robust discussion and conversation that we want to have about the research and the importance that we think it has on students. Before I turn the program back over to Dr. Peralt and the Helios team to introduce the research panel, I want to just say a word about Helios Education Foundation, especially for those who might be joining us today who may not know or be too familiar with Helios or may be new to us. First of all, Helios Education Foundation exists to support post-secondary attainment for all students, especially those from low-income or traditionally underrepresented communities in Arizona and Florida. We are driven by four fundamental beliefs that you see on the screen: community, equity, investment, and partnership. And you'll see why we think these beliefs are so important, beginning with a community and the very fundamental principle that education changes lives and makes our communities better. We also value the importance of equity, the idea of every student being successful and having equal opportunity to succeed in post-secondary education. The importance of investment, of acknowledging that education is the most important investment we can make in our students and in the future of our states and the country. And finally, partnership, which is really reflected by all of you today, because we know at Helios that it's only through partnership and collaboration, sharing of information, that we're able to have the type of impact on student success that we strive to have with all of you. Our impact strategy is focused on tackling educational inequities. We back the most promising solutions to the systemic problems that perpetuate achievement gaps, while we build a strategic and equitable response for all children in both Florida and Arizona. We have a purposeful focus on results. We're drilling down to be as intentional as we can be to support change where it's needed most. As part of our impact strategy, we have identified three key drivers that we believe are essential to getting students on track for college attainment. And that begins in our earliest education days. And we want to ensure that students are ready and reading proficiently by the end of third grade. We also want to make sure that we increase the college enrollment, the college going rate in both Arizona and Florida. And ultimately, we want to increase the post-secondary attainment rate, and in particular, the achievement of 2- and 4-year colleges for all of our students. In Florida, Helios aims to accelerate the pace of change by focusing on specific populations, which are low-income and Black students. Data show that increasing achievement rates for these specific student populations is the most effective way to achieve equity for all students. With that, I'd like to turn the program back over to Dr. Paul Peralt, who's our Senior Vice President of Community Impact and Learning. Paul and his Helios research team, which both work and produces research itself, and also oversees and manages research projects with national experts who have very different and varying subject matter expertise, but work with national experts such as those from College Board, Georgia State University, and Howard University who are with us today. Helios produces several research reports each year, and we convene individuals around that data so that we can engage in these types of conversations that we believe we need to have in order to understand how we can address the relevant issues, and in some cases, how to inform each other, work with each other, partner with each other to help inform policy and meaningful action steps that address the issues that we care so much about. Thank you again for joining us today. So Paul, let me turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Paul. We're excited to have so many folks with us today and share what we believe are significant research findings. We're recording this webinar, which can be found after today on our Helios website as well, along with it being emailed back to all of you as well. Before we get into that, we want to learn about who is here today on this meeting. We'd like to know the audience and who's participating. So we're going to launch just a series of a couple questions to ask you about who's joined us today on the webinar. So our first poll question that we want to ask is, what sector do you represent? We'll give you like 30 seconds to answer that. And then we want to ask you where, our second question is, do you operate in Florida? And then finally, does your organization have a specific strategy or program targeting Black student success? Give everybody just a second to answer those questions, or 30 more seconds, and then we'll display the results. Carolyn, can we display the results? Okay, and so now we can see where we have people across the spectrum. So about 30% of the people that have joined us today from a nonprofit community-based foundation, another 6% community or education foundation, 1% government, 2% business, 4% other. Where does your organization operate? We have about 66% in Florida, but a third of participants have joined us outside of Florida. So thank you for coming and joining this and talking with us today. And does your organization have a specific strategy or program targeting Black student success? Nearly 2/3, yes. 23% no, and about 16% not sure. So as we get to know each other, there's a lot of different people that bring a lot of different perspectives in the audience. And while you might have a Black student success strategy or not, we're all looking to improve educational opportunities for all students. And we targeted in Florida because of the opportunities that we had to look at research there, and because the data really showed us that area was an area that we could focus on and have the biggest opportunities. So now that we know a little bit more about who is with us today on the webinar, let's transition to the reason we are here today. Many of you are familiar with a prevailing narrative that college isn't worth it. And let's face it, many of us might hear that all the time, that it's too expensive, that college isn't essential to getting a job, that there's more opportunities if you just go straight into a job instead of a college. But Helios is really working to counter that narrative. And one of our key arguments in doing this is to talk about the economics of 2- and 4-year degrees. In Arizona, we've released research that squarely addresses the return on investment of giving to college. And we continue to look at that research in Florida. Today, we're going to focus and discuss a research project that makes the case for the return on investment, but specifically the return for Black students in college, Black students in Florida, of going to college. So as we look at the first slide, for this project, we put together a team of researchers with expertise in higher education and economics, really leading researchers across this country so that we could study this work and this phenomenon. On this side, you'll see the full team that contributed to this project, a few who are with us today on this webinar. And so I want to make sure that I introduce the panelists that have joined us today from this amazing team. So first, we have Dr. Andrea Smythe. Dr. Smythe is an assistant professor in Department of Economics at Howard University. She holds a PhD in economics from Temple University, and her research interests lie in the areas of human capital, labor markets, and economic inequality. Second, we have Dr. Justin Ortegas. Dr. Ortegas is an associate professor of higher education administration and policy and director of the Institute of Higher Education at the University of Florida. Prior to joining the faculty at the University of Florida, Dr. Ortegas obtained his PhD in higher education from Penn State University. His research typically examines the impact of online education, community colleges, and state policies on the opportunities and outcomes of underserved students. Last but definitely not least, my colleague Kimberly Lent Morales has a bachelor's degree in science from the University of Florida and a master's degree in public health, and she's currently earning a doctorate of curriculum and instruction with emphasis in measurement and evaluation from the University of South Florida. So in a moment, I will transition to our guests and lead us through who will help us lead us through some of the findings of the research, and then we'll moderate with some questions and with the panelists, and then give all of you an opportunity to ask questions as well. As a reminder, we will be watching the chat for those questions, which we encourage you to send at any time during the webinar. We're going to keep track of them, and we're going to try to answer as many, if not all of them, as we can. So before we get into the specifics of the research, it's important to understand why we came together for this research project. In addition to Helios's commitment to Black student success in Florida, we identified gaps in knowledge around the specific benefits of college attendance, for Black students, and saw an opportunity to inform the field. Relatively little had been studied regarding the individual and state level implications of improving college enrollment and attainment, specifically among Black students in Florida. And an important subset of this research is an inquiry into the contributions of historically Black colleges and universities. With this study, we used a unique data set that we'll talk about in a little bit to specifically examine the return on investment of college enrollment and choice for Black students and for the state of Florida. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly to talk us about the research questions. Kimberly, let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, Paul. So our project focused on 4 research questions. You'll see that questions number 1 and 2 focused on the larger population of Black students who went to high school in Florida. And then questions 3 and 4 focus on those students who chose to go to an HBCU. So for the first question, we wanted to look at how initial enrollment at a community college or a 4-year institution impacted Florida's Black high school students, their post-secondary outcomes, their economic outcomes, and their financial success. Then for that same group, we wanted to look at how Florida is impacted when those students enroll in a 2-year or a 4-year institution. And then like Paul mentioned, we do have this interest in the specialized findings for students who go to an HBCU. So we asked those same questions for students who initially enrolled at an HBCU, again, looking at what happens when they initially enroll, how does that impact their post-secondary economic, financial success, and then how does that specific enrollment influence the state. So moving on, talk a little bit about our data set. So we had the fortune to work on one of the largest and richest student level data sets in the US, and it allowed us to follow Black students who graduated from Florida high school through college and then track their financial outcomes around age 30. So because this analysis relied on comparison, so looking at students who enrolled in college versus similar students who did not initially enroll in college, the data set allowed us to match similar students based on demographics, academic performance, which colleges they applied to, and then again, looking at that difference for those who enrolled versus those who did not enroll. And in the case for HBCUs, those students who enrolled in an HBCU versus those who did not enroll in an HBCU. Second, our data allowed us to look at common success points beyond degree completion, which is often the end where most people talk about, And we were able to get insights into how these students are doing financially around age 30. And then moving on to our next slide. So talking a little bit about why this matters. So earlier, Paul mentioned that there is this prevailing narrative that college isn't worth it, and not every student needs to go to college. These conversations really only amplify the importance of the research that we're going to present today. So in answering our questions that I mentioned on previous slides, the findings show that investments in enhancing in-state college enrollment for Black students should be a priority for Florida. And again, not only in-state enrollment in general, but specific enrollment at our 4 HBCUs. At the individual level, it highlights the actual, so this is important, the actual monetary benefit for students, not a projected, not a modeled benefit of what happens when they enroll in college, and then how does that specifically influence Florida. And then at the state level, it'll show how those individual benefits add up to really significant returns in using tax revenues, reduced expenditures, and social benefits. So before I turn it over to Justin, we are going to open it up for one more poll question that you all got a preview to earlier. So I'll wait till that launches. So open-ended question. We want to know, what do you think is the biggest barrier for Black students attending and completing college? So we'll give you a few minutes, or not seconds, sorry, you will not have minutes for this. And we'll display the results here, but when we send a follow-up email with the recording, you'll also get to see these results as a whole, so you can reflect on them on your own. Okay, I think we're good to close and share the results. Oh, it's only showing 100% answered. So we will follow up with you to share some of the findings in a word cloud, just so that we can look at what were the trends in our answers. So with that, close the poll, and I'm going to turn it over to Justin, who's going to go through our findings.
Thank you, Kimberly. I'm excited to see that word cloud. Looking forward to when that comes around. So what I'm talking about here is really giving some high-level findings on college enrollment and degree completion, which really sets up some of the economic implications that my colleague, Dr. Smythe, will be talking about a little bit later. So thank you for the preemptive strike on the slide there. So really just want to reemphasize the sample here and what we're talking about whenever we say Black students in Florida. So we were able to look at just under 97,000 Black students in the state of Florida, which covers every Black student who took the SAT in between 2004 and 2010. Really important implication to kind of set the context for whom we're referencing when we talk about some of these academic outcomes that I'll be delving into momentarily. So first and foremost, a little over 36% of the students in our sample initially enrolled at a 2-year or a community college. Really important takeaway to see where they're going to college to set up some of the later findings. In addition, a little over 54% initially enrolled at any 4-year college or university out of high school. So another kind of like important context setting piece there before the later takeaways. Whenever you're talking about the students who went to the Black students who went to the 4-year institutions, we really want to think about what are the implications for the state of Florida. Are they going to an institution in the state of Florida? And what we found was just under 4 out of 5 students attended a 4-year institution and enrolled in an in-state 4-year college or university in the state of Florida. Really important implication when making a state policy argument down the road, which we'll delve into a little bit later as well. And then finally, as was noted earlier, we're very interested in historically Black colleges and universities as a potential mechanism to improve Black students' academic and economic outcomes. And what we found was roughly 16% of those in our sample enrolled in college and attended an HBCU. And that's an important takeaway there because we have some findings related to what that means for the student at an individual level. Okay, so next slide, please. So we went into the college enrollment trends that we found through the study. Now we're going to talk about some regressions and what we were able to find with some of the impact takeaways of college enrollment and degree completion. So first and foremost, want to set up the outcome and really want to be clear about this. We're talking about the likelihood, whenever we say college enrollment, of going to college. Well, this says college enrollment, but we're talking about degree completion. Really, the takeaway here is the likelihood of earning a degree and living in Florida around age 30 when initially enrolling in a 2-year, that's the 31.4%. And then the 36.6% increase is talking about the likelihood of earning a degree and living in Florida around age 30 when initially enrolling in a 4-year college. So really important takeaways, and these are actually, I believe, percentage points, which is somewhat of a technical difference there, but important to note that as well. So 31.4 percentage points and 36.6 percentage points as well. So whenever you move over to the right side of the slide here, we're talking about, what are the implications for initially enrolling in an HBCU? And what we see is there's roughly a 15 percentage point increase in the likelihood of earning a degree and living in Florida around age 30. And then finally, whenever you're talking specifically about bachelor's degree attainment, which is a really important takeaway we're going to delve into a little bit deeper in our research discussion, there's roughly a 40 percentage point increase in students' likelihood of earning a bachelor's degree. So the reason we focus on folks who stay in the state of Florida around age 30 and earn their degree is there are really important implications for tax paying and the economic benefits to the state, in addition to the individual level economic implications for the student. So with that segue in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Smythe to talk about the economics of these outcomes and what it means for these students moving forward.
And I'm muted. So what we did, we took those results about, increases in bachelor's degree, and we look at longer term outcomes. Specifically, we're looking at how that translates into household income in particular, right? And then we use household income, the increase in household income, to kind of project the net present value of college enrollment, both to the individual and then to the state. So first of all, before we look at the net present value, we find that enrolling in college or HBCU will lead to higher household income around age 30. And our income measure it goes beyond just wages. We're looking at all different sources of income. So when we look at the net present value of college enrollment, and this is a crude measure, we don't have all the information, all the data points that we'd need. So we're looking at the discounted stream of earnings for enrolling in college. And then we're just subtracting net tuition that students would pay while they're in college. And what we're finding here for the net present value of college enrollment is about $130,000 for a 4-year college and university. And then for 2-year college, it's still positive and significant, about $50,000. Right, and again, we just assume students who, and that's compared to the baseline of not going to college. All right, so and this is projected over a 35-year period. So again, remember when you think about this, multiplied by the hundreds of thousands of students who are enrolling in college, this really leads to a substantial sum in terms of students' consumption possibilities based on college enrollment. All right, so let's go to the next slide. And then we did the same thing to calculate the net present value of HBCU enrollment in particular. So remember, our comparison group for the HBCU enrollment, it includes individuals who chose to forego college, but it also includes individuals who went to different types of colleges, right? So it's kind of an average over and above students who went to other 4-year colleges, went to 2-year colleges, or no colleges, right? And we're seeing for HBCU enrollees over the 35-year period, the net present value is about $70,000, right? So again, still high and significant. All right, can we go to the next slide? All right, so let's talk a little bit about how college attainment among Black students benefits Florida in particular. So relative to students who do not enroll in college, the average estimated household earnings increases by about $6,500 for 2-year college enrollees and about $8,500 for 4-year college enrollees. We are looking at, we also look at the probability that students who enroll in college are at different percentiles of earnings. So we see that enrolling in college increases the probability by about 3 percentage points, for 2-year enrollees and 10.4 percentage point for 4-year enrollees that they will earn at the 50th percentile and above, right? So college, both 2-year and 4-year, are essentially propelling students to higher points of the earning distribution, right? Which is very important when it comes to income inequality. And then there are other benefits that it's harder to quantify, but we know they exist from other research, including reduced expenditures and social and economic assistance programs, improved health outcomes for college people who attend college, lower mortality rate, better education outcome for the next generation, and then of course, better workforce productivity, right? We know that there are a lot of spillovers for having larger amounts of college educated individuals in the population. All right, so let's do the final slide. And then we want to talk about the benefits of HBCUs in particular. So first, we adjust for individuals who live elsewhere. So a lot of students, especially HBCU enrollees, will enroll out of state, right? So Florida has 4 HBCUs. So students who are interested in HBCUs, they're also interested in out-of-state HBCUs, which is something Florida has to think about in terms of retaining Black students who are interested in HBCUs and making sure the in-state HBCUs have the capacity for those students. But adjusting for individuals who live elsewhere, HBCU enrollment increases the average estimated household earnings by about $2,700 per HBCU enrollees. And then we're also seeing HBCU enrollment increasing the probability that individuals will end up at a higher point on the income distribution, right? And then, of course, higher incomes on average will be associated with higher rates of consumer spending and consumption and all the other positive benefits we just talked about. And then, of course, increased consumption will strengthen Florida's economic condition, for example, increasing state sales tax revenues and so forth. All right, so I'll turn it over to Paul and the rest of the team.
Thank you, Andrea. And really, one of the things that we're highlighting as we come to what we're going to talk about of things we recommend is no matter how we slice and dice and look at this data, there's a benefit for the individual Black students going to college, benefits for the communities that they live in, and benefits for the state overall of having people that grow up in Florida, stay in Florida, and continue to build that economy. What does that do? That brings better jobs, better opportunities. And again, that cycle of improving educational and economic outcomes for everyone. We just couldn't find a way that it wasn't there when we saw students, especially focused here on Black students going to college and getting a 2- or 4-year degree. Thinking about that and seeing where this data led us, really kind of led us to these last policy implications that we think us at Helios, our partners and others should be considering around the state. So number one, making sure that we're investing to increase college attendance, especially in-state college attendance among Black high school students should be an economic priority for Florida. So number one, keeping those students in the state, because if they go to college, they tend to stay in college or they tend to live in Florida upon graduation, and it adds to that economic cycle. So how do we make sure that students have more opportunities, understand the implications, understand the lifelong earnings that are associated with going to college, and so making sure that we make that an investment priority is a key area that we would recommend for Florida, but also for other states. We're looking at Florida data, but these data translate to what we can see across the country. Florida would benefit in numerous ways by investing further in state-sponsored need-based financial aid and increasing supports to colleges and universities to make college more affordable. Florida already being one of the most affordable states for college in the country. When we survey students and when we look at data, we continue to hear that finances and being able to afford college, not just tuition and books, is one of those key areas that's a barrier. So how do we make sure that need-based financial aid is there, coupled with the merit-based aid that's already in the state, to give students an opportunity to go to college and have a real viable opportunity not to just go to college for 1 or 2 years, but to really complete college. And so increasing that needs-based financial aid has been another area that we would really talk about. HBCUs, looking at the data here, the data really showed the significant value of HBCUs. not being the be all end all for every student, but being another opportunity. For some students, they were much more successful if they went to an HBCU. Some students might be successful going to a non-HBCU, such as the University of Florida or Florida State or one of the state colleges. But having those opportunities for some students and increasing that, we saw really valuable and saw more likelihood for more students to actually complete college. And so having incentives for Florida for students that want to go to HBCUs to go to those HBCUs. And to ensure that HBCUs are adequately resourced. And we already see that Florida has increased some funding for HBCUs, but making sure that that funding is adequate. And are we getting it to the level that it needs to be so that students at any of the 4 institutions, the HBCUs in Florida, can be successful, the faculty can be successful, and we can have the wraparound supports that oftentimes many students need to get from the start all the way to the finish. And so those are the policy implications that we're really kind of highlighting and want ourselves and other partners to consider in the state of Florida, but really nationwide. So with that, we're going to end our presentation around the main research findings, and we're going to change it over and start having some moderated questions with this great panel. As we do that, I want to remind everybody that this is the time for you to be thinking about questions that you would like to ask this panel. And our team is going to be monitoring the chat and looking at that. And after we have a section of moderated questions, we'll come back and we'll address your questions. And obviously, this is just a great opportunity to get feedback directly from the researchers that got to work on this work. Given that, Kimberly, let me start with you with a question. We talked about the data a little bit and highlighted where this came, but I don't think we really kind of did a great job yet of talking about why this research is so special and why this data is so special. Can you talk a little bit about the data and the level of data?
Yeah, thanks so much, Paul. So if you saw the slide earlier that talked about the research team who participated on the project, you'll see Ashley Edwards, who was a key part of the research, and she was with College Board. So for this project, we merged 3 data sets together, and to create the sample that we ultimately analyzed, we looked at Black high school students in the state of Florida who took the SAT between 2004 and 2010. And this data included their test scores, what high school they enrolled in, and then basic demographics like their parent income, parent education. And then we were able to see where they sent their SAT scores, and we're using that as a proxy to see where did those students apply. So with that as our base sample, we also were able to bring in National Student Clearinghouse data, which allowed us to tell when did students enroll in college, what schools did they enroll in, when did they earn their degree, and the type of degree that they earned. So again, one of the reasons why this project is different than other analyses that look at the ROI of college for students is that we were able to go beyond just did they complete their degree, but we were able to bring in credit bureau data, which allowed us to look at hundreds of financial variables for students at around 2017, so when these students were roughly 30 years old. And this included estimates for their household income, their credit score, any student loan balances, how they've been repaying those, if they've gone into default on their loans, what kind of credit card debt they have, mortgages, where do they live at that time. So really comprehensive economic look at how are those students doing. So again, with all of those together, it really gave us an opportunity to look holistically at what happens from when the student takes the SAT, leaves high school, goes to college, and then how they're faring when they're at age 30.
Thank you, Kimberly. Justin, let's dig into some of the data and think about this a little bit more. Can you talk about where Black students are thinking about going to college right now and why that matters for their bachelor's degree completion and the labor market outcomes?
Yeah, thanks. This is really critical to think about where folks apply, and this gives you a good sense of where they're thinking about going to college, which is a major advantage of the data that Kimberly was referencing earlier. So we do have some information to unpack there. But before getting into that, I just want to briefly note there's really compelling national data over time showing us that Black students are more likely to attend less selective colleges, and they're typically enrolling or thinking about lower paying degree programs when compared to their peers with otherwise similar academic characteristics. This is a real issue we're trying to directly address through these types of analyses. So through our collaborative work with the Helios Education Foundation, we showed that really the counterfactual, or where they're thinking about going instead for Black students who are applying to, let's say, HBCUs as an example, is not another similar four-year institution as the HBCU to which they're considering attending. It's oftentimes an HBCU from a community college, or not going to college at all. Roughly 9% of our sample, even though they took the SAT and they went through this process for college going and this critical metric for college admissions, especially at the time, they didn't actually go to college at all. So even though I'm talking about the importance of selective institutions, and I'll end that point on what that means for implications for labor market outcomes, I also want to quickly note that I'm a major advocate of community colleges. I know my colleagues are as well in their open access mission. But for this study, we're really talking about comparing students with similar SAT scores who may be academically qualified to attend a selective university, and really trying to make sure we're doing right by those students and giving them an optimal pathway to earn a bachelor's degree and have higher labor market outcomes. So the data are clear that starting at a four-year institution truly is the optimal pathway to a bachelor's degree. And individuals who earn a bachelor's degree have substantially higher labor market outcomes when compared to individuals with an associate degree, any type of certificate, or no college degree or credential at all. So really the data are compelling, and that's a key takeaway of why this work is really important.
Thank you, Justin. Andrea, you are really, you're our lead economist on this work. And let's think about this, the economics of the case and what we've been talking about today. How does it increase economic opportunity for the individual person, but also for the state involved here?
Well, there are three things I want to talk about, and I'm sure there are a lot more that I could mention, but I mentioned three. One, we're looking at the lifetime earnings premiums for a college degree. It's higher for students, and again, both just looking at a college degree in general, and then HBCUs in particular. And especially when we're talking about students who are lower income or historically marginalized, this idea of increasing lifetime earnings by $200,000, that's a significant amount, right? And then second, when we think about for the state, again, a key part of the research, we didn't get to highlight as much, and I'll talk a little bit about it when we get to the HBCU, is the idea that a lot of students, and Justin mentioned, are kind of at the margins of going to college or not going to college, or going to a 2-year versus a 4-year institution. And we're seeing those higher degree attainments will lead to, of course, when we think about higher taxes for the state, higher consumption overall, which again will feed into private sector and consuming power of these students, lower spending on welfare programs. And we'll talk about some of the other social benefits of college, lower mortality rates, better health outcomes, and so forth. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about the economic inequality idea. Again, when we're thinking about students who are at the lower end of the economic spectrum, and being able to move up the income ladder. And again, we're talking about Black students who are usually lower on the economic income spectrum. That is going to lead to closing those gaps in economic inequality. All right, so it's very important, both college in general, but also HBCUs in particular.
Thank you, Andrea. And I love the questions. We're just reminding everyone we are keeping track of those, so please keep the great questions coming. Some of them will probably get touched on in our questions from the panel, but we're going to make sure that we get back to those questions when we get to the Q&A section. Andrea, love what you were just talking about. And I want to connect it though back, Justin, to you. Beyond higher salaries, what are some other key benefits for Black students getting a college degree? What are we seeing in the research? What are we seeing overall in Florida because of that?
Yeah, the first and most obvious, not tied to a higher salary, is that not just more likely to have a higher salary, they're more likely to remain employed. So a lower rate of unemployment is critical to acknowledge there. A lot of really important high-level takeaways are civic participation. The empirical literature is clear on college degrees leading to a higher likelihood to vote. Andrea mentioned this earlier about health outcomes. I think it's important to note that has like two implications. One is a healthier lifestyle. So folks have fewer health issues and medical bills, et cetera. So all these kind of issues are connected to higher quality of life through, college attainment, but also obviously connected to that again is a longer life expectancy, which has also been empirically found through the literature. And one more quick thing is a lower likelihood of being arrested. There's just so many different civic and social outcomes that benefit students and individuals and really the state in which they reside that show that, beyond higher salaries, there are critical benefits for not just Black students, but students in general. But clearly in this study, we're showing Black students and talking about the empirical literature on different subgroups of students. So as I noted, it's not just lower rates of unemployment, it's lower likelihood of being arrested, higher likelihood to vote, a healthier lifestyle, which is tied to medical bills and debt, a longer life expectancy. And there are more, and I could keep going, but I will stop. But there's just a host of issues tied to and outcomes tied to college enrollment and attainment.
Thanks, Justin. We've talked a lot about the opportunities. The second part of the study, or in addition to the overall study, we also focused in and zeroed in on HBCUs. And so, Andrea, I might want to ask you what, while there are clear benefits of going to college, what are the key takeaways for Black students going to an HBCU?
So the HBCU part of the research is particularly interesting. We're seeing substantial increases in bachelor's degree attainment. And a part of it is that HBCUs are more likely to be four-year colleges. So just by virtue of considering an HBCU in college application portfolio, it means the students will be more likely to initially enroll in a four-year college. And that leads to huge improvements in the chance of completing college, a bachelor's degree, 40% increase. That's huge. So that's one. But then we also think about the types of degrees that students earn when they attend HBCUs. We see that the attending HBCU is going to increase higher paying majors. For example, the 3 4-year HBCU in Florida, they're producing more Black STEM graduates than a lot of the other non-HBCUs combined, right? So HBCUs are doing kind of a disproportionately positive impact job of producing not only college graduates, but college graduates who major in higher earning majors. Right? And again, those are just two of the unique contributions of HBCUs to the higher education landscape. And just in general, HBCUs are disproportionately educating Black college students, right? So again, we have 4 HBCUs, but they're educating 14 to 16% of all Black students in Florida. And again, they're doing this in the face of historical underfunding. So they're not getting the resources that they need based on how much of the load they're carrying in educating the state's Black population.
Thank you, Andrea. Very, very important. Paul, I want to kind of jump back and step back from the research for a little bit and talk to you about the philanthropic opportunities in that, and especially Helios. So I wonder if you can share with participants what you seeing this research do and research like it and how it might be used.
Well, I think, Paul, thank you for that. I think what we really hope, and aspiration here is a big part of the work that we do at Helios and in partnership with all of you, right? This hope and aspiration of engaging in education attainment and what that means, not just for the individual student, but the student, the family, the neighborhood, the communities, the entire states. It's why we think it's important to acknowledge, the economic impact, the broader types of increased engagement in volunteerism and support of civic engagement that comes with education attainment, and the opportunity to engage in partnerships and collaborations with so many of you. Research brings some of the fact and the data to the conversation so that we can ground ourselves together. And we say often at Helios, we like to say everyone has and is entitled to their own opinion. And their own perspective. Our founding chairman says that often, but facts and data you don't get to make up on your own. So if we can bring together in partnership with great researchers like today, some fact and some data, now we're starting from agreed upon perspective of information, and now we can bring our perspectives. Now we can bring our learnings and help each other to improve, and then measure that success. So much of what this research has come about, quite frankly, came from conversations that we had with our board of directors. And that's why it's so gratifying for us that many of our board members have joined us today. I do want to acknowledge Tom Herndon, one of our other board members, a longtime community leader in the state of Florida, was able to join us, and I saw him as well. And it informs us, it gives us perspective and feedback so that we can be, as an organization, committed to this work, committed to support of all students in Florida, but in particular, Black student success as meaningful impact. It gives us an opportunity to better understand where we can be most effective, have the greatest impact, and then show the value and the benefits of what post-secondary education can mean to our state and to our country.
Thank you, Paul. I might want to actually push on you a little bit more. Can you talk about it? Because I already see some of this coming in the chat. Any key actions that you think we should be taking, maybe first or second, at the state, district, community level? What are those first actions that people can start to get involved to start taking on this?
Well, I thank you, Paul, and I think the idea is that research should always lead to action. So let's just start with that, right? I don't think any of us are interested in research just for the sake of research or data just to bring data. If we don't engage meaningfully to begin to move to action, and whether that action becomes, and this is where the benefit of this type of information sharing becomes valuable to all of us, because the questions you're asking in the chat will inform our future research opportunities. So where do we continue to take research from here? What are the key questions that haven't been addressed? We see some of the questions that we maybe don't even have the answers to today or yet the ability to get at. But when the questions start to then provide us with guidance and direction, we get a better sense of where meaningful information, additional research can bring value. The other side is where we might learn and understand that there's already some solutions and actions that are having impact, right? Oftentimes we don't know what we don't know. So these types of conversations and dialogue will help when you say, what's the next step to action? Well, there may be some opportunities to build upon what is already working. There may be some opportunities to raise awareness to what's working, but maybe there's policy implications. So we now bring together collectively, Helios and others, voice to this work that advocates for very specific policy changes that we know will have meaningful impact, because the data is telling us that we already know the potential impact that it will have. So I think the next step, Paul, is to always remain open and understanding what others are doing, given the opportunity to learn and partner. And next step is continued engagement.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to transition us over to our Q&A section now, and I want to start out with a question from Jerry Bell. Great question about where's this data going next, and Paul, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about this first. And Jerry's question is, what's going to happen with this data? Will it be presented to the Department of Education for Florida, individual college and universities, and has there been any other interest from anyone else in the state of Florida? Might you talk a little bit about what Helios has already done and around that type of work?
So that's a great question, and Jerry's been a longtime friend for many of us, and Helios in particular, and some of the leadership he provides around the Black Leadership Network in Tampa. And the short answer, Jerry, is yes. This information is intended to be shared with folks on our team like Janice Palmer and others. We have provided this information to the Florida Department of Education, to the Board of Governors. The idea is to share this with legislators whenever we have an opportunity to engage in conversation, to share our perspective of our priorities, and in particular, the commitment to focusing on eliminating traditional equity gaps in education attainment. This information and research becomes very valuable. We share it with legislators who I know are interested in having data and a better understanding as well. And then it gets back to, okay, what do we do next, right? We hear from legislators, other opinion leaders, elected leaders, and the data grounds us then with a common understanding where we then can start to focus on, well, where can we then take meaningful action to improve the outcomes we want to see? And we will continue to look for opportunities like that. We will ask all of you hearing today, if this is valuable information to you, we're going to ask you, share it with others. You may know of other individuals or organizations who would benefit from this type of information that we're providing. So please share it with others and then provide us feedback, give us guidance as well.
Thank you. Our next question really, and can be open to anyone in the panel, any best practices? We know that we started this conversation that there are people out there pushing a narrative that college isn't worth it. And so this question really gets to the heart of any best practices in communicating the value in what college means for students and their families. So how are we transitioning? How are we letting high school students or people thinking about going to college, any best practices to do that to help get that message across? Andrea, might I start with you on that? How are you thinking about that of the students that you're working with and that are coming up through high school and trying to get that message out there?
Sure. So I think a big part of getting students into college and then graduating is making sure they're prepared, right? So at the lower levels of education, we have to start there. One, in making sure they're prepared in terms of academics, but also in setting expectations about what the opportunities are once they leave high school and lower education, right? So if students are not being presented, in 2 or 4 years, college might be the next best step for you, right? So essentially having that expectation of college is really one of the best opportunity available to you in terms of your long-term earning potential. So those are two things, academically and socially, explaining to students the benefits of college. But then once they get to the college decision, making sure the barriers to application enrollment are as low as possible, right? So, there are a lot of studies that shows just providing students with certain information will literally change what decision they make. A lot of students are at the margin of whether should I go to college or not. And just small incentives can actually bump them over to make that choice to go to college. And even HBCUs in particular, we see in our research that even having students consider the HBCU option in their college portfolio is going to increase the likelihood that they enroll in a 4-year college, right? So there are some research there about what we can do, but again, starting from the lower levels of education, right up until they get ready to apply, removing the barriers to application. And then, of course, once they get to college, making sure the support is there. We know the support that students need, making sure it's there, whether it's financial, social, academic support to make sure that they're completing.
So, Paul, I might add to that if I could, and kind of keying off of Andrea's comment about academic preparedness of students, right, which is an important element. I know some of our work and in partnership with many others is digging deep into how do we ensure that all of our students have access to rigorous curriculum, and in particular, opportunities like dual enrollment, which we know is so valuable for moving a student into, even from a cultural perspective, this idea of eliminating the question of a student while they're in high school is, well, are you a college student? Are you college bound? It's like, well, if you start taking dual enrollment while you're in high school, you've eliminated that question because by definition, you're already a college student. You're taking college coursework. And just as importantly, you're preparing that student academically for the type of schoolwork and discipline and understanding of what they'll need to do in order to succeed academically once they get into a college environment. So those are the types of best practices I think we can do more in engaging and understanding where there might be barriers of students who don't have access to dual enrollment. And that's where the community problem solving comes in, working with legislators and elected leaders to say, how do we make dual enrollment, as an example, or access to advanced placement, of equal importance and engagement for all of our students, wherever they might be coming from.
Justin, I want to make sure that we have an opportunity. Did you want to connect on that too? I thought you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to really quickly say that oftentimes whenever you think about the students who are reticent or the students who are really on the margins or thinking about whether college makes sense, they're disproportionately low-income students, racially minoritized students, and oftentimes that's tied to like debt aversion and being kind of nervous about the idea of taking out student loan debt to pay for college. And setting aside that college is unequivocally a really good investment, and we've kind of like talked through, especially when there's bachelor's degree completion as the ultimate goal and the outcome, just communicating that. So in this study, we're very clear about net present value and accounting for the loan debt that one takes on and giving students time enough to enter the labor market. I saw in the chat, somebody asked, why wait to age 30? And Kimberly very aptly kind of noted this gives folks times if they want to go to graduate school to get settled in their kind of like employment. Sometimes what you'll see is something about the benefits of college, and it's like only a year or two after they graduate college, and they'll say, oh, it doesn't make sense to be an English major or something along those lines. And you see down the road, those labor market returns really do continually increase, where across the board and across disciplines, college makes sense economically, as well as all the social and public goods we referenced earlier. So I get the initial instinct to be kind of like debt averse and loan averse, and I myself was that indeed. I didn't know what a Pell Grant was my first year in college. I didn't take advantage of that till my later years in college. So just trying to communicate the opportunities available and really piggybacking off of Andrea's point about removing those access barriers and giving students the best shot to go through the college experience and earn the much needed bachelor's degree. So that's just what I wanted to add. Thanks for the opportunity to chime in there.
Thanks so much, Justin, and really the whole team that's been a part of this panel today. I think we could go on for another hour of questions, but unfortunately we're kind of coming to the end of our time for Q&A. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out, Paul talked about partnerships and opportunities. We have a couple partners that if you wanted to look into more of some of those community relationships where we're doing that, have Nelson from Miami-Dade and our Rising Scholars work that we do, and Lisa from Pelley, and those are at Pinellas, and those are great opportunities to look at some current research projects that Helios is doing to really try to effectuate that change. As we come to the end, I really want to give Paul, you an opportunity to close with the remarks on this. We've talked through the research, we've addressed the important research findings, talked about the work that we can be thinking about, and even talked a little bit about Helios's connections with other work, but really wanted to offer you the closing opportunity to talk about next steps and about this work and where we go from here.
Well, thank you again, Paul. And I guess being sort of hosts of the webinar, we get to have the last word a little bit. So, that's probably always a good thing. But let me start first and foremost with thanks and appreciation. Thanks to all of you for joining us today, for taking of your time to give us an opportunity to share our research, some of our learnings, our work, to benefit from all that you have to share with us and to continue to give us guidance in the work that we do. I want to thank our panelists for not only sharing your learnings today and giving us greater insight to the research, but for being our partners, for continuing to engage with us, to help us to understand how we can continue to improve, our research, our focus, that which is going to have the greatest impact in helping students, which is ultimately how we always measure success. Are we helping more students be successful in post-secondary education? We are very mindful that that's ultimately what we're all about in doing this work together. And yes, and research and data is a part of how we envision community impact from a Helios perspective. Our thinking is that it takes a multi-pronged approach to really have the type of impact with students and student success that we want to achieve together with all of you. So the research and data aspect is what we're sharing today. And I want to acknowledge this is not the end of the research work. This is, if anything, it's just the beginning. It starts to inform us for what are the next steps? Where do we go from here? And I hope it continues to be in the spirit of partnership and collaboration with many of you. We also work from a Helios perspective in performance-based community investments. We have community engagement teams in Florida and Arizona who help to identify these specific actions and partnerships that we engage in, that we invest in order to help move the work forward. I mentioned earlier the idea of the importance of engaging in public policy, knowing how impactful and important public policy is to improving the type education in the manner with which we want to influence policy that we know will have the type of impact, because research is telling us that it will have these outcomes, but working in public policy and finally having an opportunity to share our learnings, right? It was one of the important messages from our board early on when we had conversations about how do we bring research and data to conversation. There was always acknowledgement that says, but we also have to share our learnings. So having a communications team, strategic communications, to be able to work together, share the learning, share the best practices, all of this wraps together in the way we think is most beneficial to engage in community work. So we look, and we'll end with just the continued ask. The ask is, please help us continue the work in partnership with all of you. Help us to support students who will benefit from the work that we do to have equal, not just equal access to education success, but equal access to the opportunities that we know each student deserves, and be able to continue to come back, to improve, to help each other improve. We look forward to continuing engaging with you. We thank you for your time today, for your questions, your feedback, your comments, and we encourage you to stay engaged with us, not just today. If other opportunities emerge, if other ideas for partnership emerge, please reach out to our team. Once again, partnership being a fundamental belief of how we do this work, we want to encourage you to please stay engaged with us. Monitor, we send out newsletters. We try to share transparently who we are and what we do. And we want to make sure we get that communication out to all of you. So again, thank you for being here today. Enjoy the rest of your day. I think we've come to the end of this webinar, and hopefully we'll have more in the future, and look forward to seeing you and engaging you in all of those activities. So thank you, and have a great day.